This presentation was sampled from the original policy brief created by me, Kanisha Weaver, Sarah Carey, Kelly Thornborough, and Alyssa Van Balen. We chose this topic because the prevalence of domestic violence in Georgia is representative of the barriers that women of color face due to race, class, ethnicity, and access to services. So we aptly titled our policy proposal, Access Denied, reflecting these barriers. By the time you reach the end of this first slide, 6 more women will have become a victim of domestic violence. Emergency shelters, education, and intervention programs are underfunded and lack resources for addressing the needs of African American women. 53 counties in Georgia have either no access or limited access to domestic violence services. 121 domestic violence-related fatalities were reported in Georgia in 2017, and the death toll is still rising. Every 9 seconds, a woman is beaten. Nearly half of all African American women experience interpersonal violence in their lifetime. Due to a severe lack of funding and resources, half of all women and children who have experienced domestic violence are now homeless. Georgia's rate of domestic violence and the limited access to critical resources exacerbate the social barriers to intervention and educational programs. When domestic violence shelters are ill-equipped to serve the most vulnerable populations, this social issue rapidly develops into an epidemic. Social media platforms have been proven to provide better access to education and publicity for funding and awareness, and for this reason would be a powerful addition to any domestic violence resource toolkit. Domestic violence impacts 1 in 4 women and 1 in 14 men. Domestic violence impacts everyone. Domestic violence is a personal and social issue and is still surrounded by stigma. It was not until recently that domestic violence became a public social issue. Previously, domestic violence was considered a matter to be dealt with at home or faced stigma and shame. Domestic violence awareness is beginning to take a larger part of the public sphere. As social media encourages conversations of awareness and allows anyone to have access to the public discourse. Additionally, domestic violence has recently become criminalized and is punishable by law, to some degree, in some states. Some states have even enacted a mandatory arrest procedure following domestic violence calls, regardless of what the survivor desires. Domestic violence can impact anyone, no matter race, sex, socioeconomic status, or nationality. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 14 men have experienced physical violence that meets the legal threshold for domestic violence. Despite this, many people still hold stigmas toward survivors of domestic violence and believe it cannot happen to them or to their loved ones. Although domestic violence occurs across all races and ethnicities, this epidemic occurs disproportionately to minority populations. In this brief, we are specifically addressing the barriers faced by African American women, who have a much higher rate of domestic violence as compared to the general population. Additionally, African American women face more barriers than other communities to reach support services. These barriers include structural violence, such as racism and economic segregation, which leads to minority populations being marginalized into impoverished and disadvantaged areas. These areas are often underfunded and do not have enough resources to properly assist the population. Some studies have shown that domestic violence survivors who are African American are less likely to receive referrals to support services from police officers following domestic violence reports. As of today, more than 1,600 Georgia citizens have lost their lives due to domestic violence. In 2015, there were 44,000 crisis calls to Georgia's certified domestic violence agencies. This same year, 6,000 victims and their children were provided nearly 300,000 nights of refuge in a domestic violence shelter across the state of Georgia. Unfortunately, more than 2,500 victims that made a request for shelter were denied due to a lack of space. Domestic violence, if allowed to escalate, can progress to the point of murder and murder-suicide. The state of Georgia has seen an increase in the past few years of its domestic violence fatality rate, meaning that more perpetrators of domestic violence are killing their partners. Additionally, Georgia is ranked 8th in the nation for domestic violence fatalities, which is a very serious issue and speaks to the amount of domestic violence situations that escalate to the point of homicide. This policy brief focuses on one particular shelter in Georgia, Liberty House. It is a nonprofit that covers nearly 20 counties. Liberty House serves a large metropolitan region with a majority African American population. Their services include education, emergency shelter, and general community awareness. A majority of the population of the region that Liberty House serves is more likely to find barriers when seeking support for domestic violence. Making the decision to leave an unsafe or unhealthy relationship for oneself and their children can be very difficult. Unfortunately, though, that is often just the beginning for survivors, as they face an uphill battle with the systemic barriers that make it difficult to access domestic violence resources. Issues such as cultural and financial barriers often stand in the way of women getting the help they truly need. For this reason, shelter efficacy is one of the utmost importance. Survivors need to be comfortable and confident in the help they are receiving once they make the very brave decision to seek help. One of the disturbing realities is that domestic violence shelters are overcrowded, underfunded, and are being forced to turn away children and families. Many communities have domestic violence resources available to their patrons, but many community members do not feel they can seek out these services due to sociocultural factors. Reasons that victims are unwilling or feel unable to seek out resources they need is because of the social stigmas surrounding domestic violence victims and the resources they require. Additionally, issues of structural violence such as male dominance, racism, and economic segregation all contribute to victims not receiving care. There are also perceptions of inconsistencies in the legal system and when cooperating with the police. For one, legal system bias and criminalization can result in re-victimization and a perception of the loss of autonomy. Furthermore, concerns of police bias and improper police intervention has the potential to deter victims from seeking help. Unfortunately, these biases typically result in underrepresentation and limited access to resources in African American communities. While the need for Liberty House's services may vary, on average, they support one member per county per day. For this reason, it is imperative that Liberty House continue to be supported through federal, state, and local grants, as well as private funding, so that they can continue to support women and children in their local Georgia communities. While Liberty House already has certain programs in place, such as support groups, community education, prevention services, and advocacy, there are other ways in which the organization can expand their reach and benefit more victims in the surrounding area. It is helpful to include both positive and negative aspects of sexuality in order to aid in the fight against domestic violence, because it not only shows survivors what the signs of an unhealthy relationship looks like, but also what a healthy relationship should look like. Creating this balance will assist victims with separating themselves from unhealthy situations and helping them to frame the terms of what a healthy relationship looks like to them. After all, isn't that what we want for all victims and survivors? A future relationship where they can feel safe, loved, and respected. Moreover, many sexual education programs exclude information about pleasure-based sex practices. Including a comprehensive sexual education program into Liberty House's available services would not only provide them with the necessary tools to heal from their abuse, but also help them develop the mental and emotional knowledge to become and to choose healthy sexual partners. Other barriers include gaining access to the organization, which can be difficult for those who are not within a certain radius. This geographic separation, coupled with being forced to travel lengthy distances, can be debilitating to women who are already afraid for their lives. One of the reasons victims fail to leave abusive situations is because of the lack of transportation to get to a place that offers safety and support. To mitigate this concern, it is important that Liberty House creates more locations and transportation resources as a great countermeasure to this barrier. Creating culturally centered outreach programs based on the demographics of the area Liberty House serves would help bring comfort to victims seeking assistance, because this assistance would be culturally relevant. Oftentimes, domestic abuse involves a wide breadth of cultural factors, including, but not limited to, cultural stigmas about getting help, cultural ideals about what constitutes abuse, and cultural slurs that may be thrown around, further victimizing survivors. For this reason, it is absolutely necessary to have a culturally competent response from an organization who provides domestic violence services to culturally diverse areas. Awareness is essential to stop the cycle of domestic violence. Through the use of technology, domestic violence programs can utilize social media platforms to help expand awareness and access to educational programs. These programs are necessary to educate communities, survivors, and potential victims. Although Liberty House serves a 17-county-wide area, it is possible that not everyone in need is aware of their existence. Social media reaches people on a global scale, so reaching those in Liberty House's region would be quite simple. Liberty House currently utilizes Facebook and Twitter. However, there's a very small follower base. While they do post helpful news and updates, if only a few people see it, how beneficial is it really? Liberty House's minimal social media presence across Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram does not currently have the ability to reach more than a small handful of people. Domestic violence shelters all across the country, including Liberty House, have been facing many challenges over the years. There has been a large growth in domestic violence rates within the counties they serve. Therefore, additional funding is needed in order to provide students and community members with information regarding interpersonal violence, pleasure-based sex education, and advocacy-based survivors' rights. These goals can be accomplished through the expansion and use of social media. Social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram have the ability to educate people on the ramifications of domestic violence. As people all over the world use these apps on a weekly, if not daily basis, especially among young adults, social media is booming. 18 to 24-year-olds are at the highest risk for being assaulted. So incorporating the use of these platforms would give them a voice. Allowing people the freedom to talk about their experiences will open the doors for increased conversation and connection between victims. Even those individuals who have never personally been a part or witnessed domestic violence can benefit from seeing how big of an issue this really is. Knowing it happens and reading victims' personal accounts of their abuse is extremely different and can prove to be quite eye-opening. Those who may be too afraid or embarrassed to speak up can see they are not alone. And through these shared experiences and dialogue, there can be healing. Social media raises public awareness about the realities of the issues surrounding the African American community in Georgia. Social media increases potential victim identification and can be used to inform first responders, advocates, and those working in the educational system. Social media as an educational tool provides strategies for intervention to help victims access resources. The use of Facebook, Twitter, internet crowdsourcing, and text messaging services help the affected communities connect with large-scale awareness campaigns. This type of community engagement allows users to present options, alternatives, and provides a significant resource for feedback to help determine when programs and resources work or when they need to be reevaluated. On average, more than 3 women are murdered by their partners in this country every day. Every year, more and more shelters are struggling to keep their doors open. Cutting programs and service hours have contributed to the increased rates of domestic violence victims. Social media services such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are a part of the growing trend to promote political speech, conversations about social issues, and community coordination. Social media activism for awareness, advocacy, organization, and mobilization is essential to bypass traditional media restrictions. As a social responsibility to break down the barriers that African American women face when trying to access domestic violence services, it is essential that we not only identify these barriers, but use every resource to provide access to programs that educate, advocate, and prevent the cyclic effect of violence against African American women. Increasing Liberty's House's outreach will be beneficial in helping victims become survivors, because not only are they being victimized at home, but possibly by a system with inadequate aid and support. Thank you for watching and listening to this presentation. If there is anything I hope that you take away from this, is that everyone, regardless of gender, sexual identity, race, class, or status, has either been a victim of domestic violence or knows someone who is. And when we break the silence, we can break the cycle. Thank you.